Okay, it looks like everyone has settled in. So we wanted to take this moment to welcome Lance Hockasan, who is the Senior Manager of Business Intelligence at F5. So Lance, welcome to the stage. It's all yours.
Thanks, Jason, and welcome everyone to a presentation on turning your data pipeline on its head. I am Lance Hockasan, and I am the Senior Manager at F5 Networks of the Data Engineering and Analytics team. I'm going to start. Oh, there we go. Quick introduction. So what is F5? Any of you that have fairly large data centers probably already have experience with some of F5 products. We are a networking primarily and security team that focuses on delivery, security, and performance of applications through both traditional data centers and through public clouds and public-private data center combinations. A little bit about my team. So I manage a group of about 30 data engineers and analytics engineers, so people who are both doing the data engineering pipeline and people who are producing and consulting with other groups throughout F5 on creating data analytics on the front end. We also have a group of data scientists. Data science is a bit of a newer thing at F5, and so we're dipping our toes into that. I also manage the system and site reliability team. A little bit of background on me, 30 seconds or less. I'm not a person who came into business intelligence, data engineering through the traditional computer science model. I was actually, like Bart you're seeing in the picture, the guy who was up in finance 20 years ago, griping about the business intelligence, data warehouse team, how they could never get me the data that I needed when I needed it. And I'd ask for something, and in the end, I just was the guy dumping all my data into Excel. And when Excel 64-bit came out a long time ago and Power Pivot, I was jumping up and down saying, yay, finally I can get the amount of data I need. So because I was the guy that was always causing the problems and griping, they eventually said, okay, we're just going to have you manage the team and figure out how we can get better insights faster out of our data warehouse team. So one of the primary goals that I have for the team is what I call code to customer or time to insight. And how do we move it faster so that we have code to customer, code to consumer as fast as we can? And how do we minimize the time to insight so that people can make use of the data faster? So the goals of the presentation is really to talk through, why is it that traditional data warehouses that work so well for so long really don't cut it in a time of digital transformation, data science, online analytics. In the past, they worked great because there were a lot of constraints on data warehouses, things like bandwidth, disk speeds, database speeds. But because of the old paradigm, time to insights was really long. And what we're going to talk through is how you can use modern data engineering and data platforms to dramatically reduce your time to insight by curating only what you need and bringing code to customer faster. So I want to start out with what were the F5 journey pain points, because I think a lot of you that are in the space of maybe you're already thinking about moving to a modern data platform, maybe you're getting some of these issues with your team already. I think some of this will resonate with you. So for me personally, one of the big issues was data curation took a really long time. So say, for example, I wanted data out of our ERP system. And the data engineering team had done a great job modeling maybe 50% of what was in our ERP system. But there was this one new column that we had just added in the ERP system, and I wanted to pull that into some sort of analytics or insight that would help my boss, my leaders. And so I would submit the enhancement request, it would get queued up. Couple months later, they'd say, okay, we're doing our backlog grooming and you've risen to the top of the pile, so we're going to start working on it. Then they'd have to open up their ETL process, pull that new column in from the source system, land it in the data warehouse. I couldn't get to it from there because that was the landing zone. Then they'd put it through the curated model. Then they'd put it into a view. And then finally, 3, 6, 12 months later, I had that piece of information that I really needed 3 months ago. So the time to insight measurement was really months, quarters, and sometimes even years, and sometimes never, right? If somebody wanted a data element and that feature, that story never percolated to the top in backlog grooming, in story point weighting, people just couldn't get to it. And so the other problem was that often, they would put data in the data warehouse based on a story, and then someone would come along and say, oh, we didn't really need that. One of the other big problems I had on the finance side was I had all kinds of data from third parties that I couldn't easily blend in. Sure, I could use something like Power Pivot, but that meant then how do I pull all of that data into Power Pivot from our data warehouse and try to combine it? And it meant that only my Power Pivot worksheet was able to join that data together very easily. And then on the other side of the house, in the engineering space, traditional databases just didn't offer a lot of options for things like variable loads, data science. So our data scientists would come to the team and say, hey, we want to run this model. Just, it's going to put a real heavy load on the system. Okay, what do we do? Do we clone the database? Do we kick everybody off? Do we have ETL processes running slower because of it? We didn't have a lot of options. So we were always having to build for whatever that high water mark we thought we were going to hit. And then do we add capacity? Do we add CPUs when we get these really peak variable loads? One of the other issues, I love Kimball models. I think that 80% of the time they're great, but they don't necessarily fit every need. And so the data engineering team would do all this work to curate and build their facts and build their dimensions. And then someone on the analytics side would say, oh, that's not quite what I need in that dimension, or I need this other view, or maybe it's a type 2 dimension and they're having problems working with it because they don't understand how a type 2 works. So it led to all of those kinds of issues. And the team was just buried under enhancements. So this is basically what our architecture looked like before we went and made the migration. We had a bunch of different data sources, probably like you all have, some of them cloud, Salesforce, Marketo, Adobe, and some of them on-prem. Our ERP system, our support system, we're all running on-prem on maybe an Oracle or a SQL Server database. And we had to pipe all that into this factory. And we were using Informatica, we were using Warescape. For a while, we were using SAP Data Services. And in that factory, you connect to the data, you land the data, you transform the data, and then you load the data into your data warehouse. And maybe you build a couple data marts and some materialized views off of that. But then the sales team comes along and says, hey, there was this one column we didn't tell you about in Salesforce, and we need it in this view that's way down the pipeline. So you crank open the enhancement, you land that column, you put it through the transformation, you land it in the dimension, you add it to those materialized views, and then 3 months later, they get it, and they finally can make insights on it. So this model just was not working for our team because as we started moving into data science, as our data analysts became more advanced, they kept saying, this just takes too long. By the time we get the data, the moment of insight is over. We've missed the opportunity, or we're behind on the opportunity. How do we make it faster? So we started doing some research on what's the new and better way. And working through this project, we said, okay, what are our goals of our modern data pipeline? And we set some pretty high level goals that I thought were lofty at the time, but we were able to execute and achieve most of these. So first and foremost, we wanted to improve our time to insight by a factor of 50. And that may sound like, a really high number. How do you make your data pipelines twice as fast, 3 times as fast? I wanted to make time to insight 50 times faster. So if in the past our average time to insight was 3 to 6 months, I wanted it to be days or hours between when somebody said, I want to do some sort of analytics on data, and they got the data in their hands. We really wanted to make self-service more of a way at F5. So we're really moving towards how do we change the culture of data and analytics at F5? How do we make data part of everybody's day-to-day job? How do we put it into their job description that I use data to make decisions? Well, the only way to do that is if people have easy access to the data. And we realized that through data curation, we were sometimes getting in the way of self-service because we were giving people an excuse not to do self-service. We were saying, hey, you've got to wait till it's all the way curated through all these models. You got your facts, you got your dimensions, it's safe before you even start doing some investigation work. And we wanted that investigation work to happen earlier so we could determine what do we really need to operationalize in those curated data models. And that came down to how do we decrease the data consumption friction so people don't have to write an enhancement, throw it into my team's queue, the enhancement happens, and then finally they get it. So the big goal there was land everything, then sort it out in the end. So rather than trying to figure out at the beginning during requirements, what columns do you need? What tables do you need? How do these different things join together? Let's just throw it all in there and let our SMEs and our data experts start to work with that data and figure it out. Our other goal was make everything cloud and subscription based. I wanted to move to a variable cost model so we could auto scale at any time. Data scientists come to us and say, we've got this crazy data model, great. We can spin off your own cluster, knock yourselves out, have fun with it. It'll shut itself down when you're done. And the last one was really to, again, grow this idea of self-service, have this bring your own data model, have data sandboxes. Let's face it, we all know this world of shadow IT lives out there. And I hate calling it shadow IT because this is really data that's important for people. And they're not trying to do anything nefarious. They just don't have a path to merge their data easily with the corporate data to get their job done. So we wanted to embrace that shadow IT and just make it part of the platform so people could drop their own data onto the platform, easily join it in, have that data part of the overall corporate data lake so that we don't have 5 people all dropping like Fortune 500 data or demographic data or some other data into their own little data mart and not being able to share it amongst each other. So this is how we got there at a very high level. And then we'll take a step after this and look at the architectural model. We started out with a replication tool, and that was essential because that lets us grab everything, drop it into the data lake. And then in our data lake, we divide it into 3 zones. We've got our raw data zone, which is just data replicating. It's just dropping in as real time as we can make it. Everything, nothing gets left behind. Then once the data analysts start to look at that raw data zone, we curate what we need with a modern transformation tool. And then the third part of that is providing that experimental data zone. So it's a bit of a walled off zone in our data lake. We've got a lot of controls. We clean the lake, the sandbox every 3 to 6 months. So things that haven't been used just kind of get plowed over and keeps it clean. We also provides tons of visibility to what are people dropping in their experimental zone. How are they sharing it? How are they joining it in with the curated and the raw data? So here's where we are right now. We've got data coming in, like I said, from the cloud. We're replicating all of that in Marketo, Gainsight, Coveo, Salesforce. We still have our ERP system. So the nice thing is, we've been working with Fivetran on this. We can connect up with our SQL servers that are on-prem. We can connect up with our ERP system that's on-prem. We even connected up to our old legacy data warehouse, and we're just replicating that whole thing up because, hey, there's a lot of good curated data there, but people had some of it in one data mart, another data mart, and another data mart. We said, forget it. We're just going to replicate it all into the raw data zone so people have that. And now they don't have to worry about how do I join data from our customer support data mart into our ERP data mart. It's all in one data lake. They can easily join it together. And then we're using some other tools to do that replication also where we don't have a good connector. We're using Azure Data Factory, we're using Snowpipe, we're using Azure Functions, a lot of different ways, but we are trying to centralize around a single replication tool that pulls all that in. But we are still on the journey, so we're still using legacy transformation tools, Wirescape Red and Informatica. But we wanted to start with first, How do we make it easy for time to insight? How do we get code to customer to be faster? And then how do we do our internal processes to improve our speed of curation? All right, so I think this is probably the most important discussion point is how did we get there? Because everyone's going to have their own journey. Everybody's in different phases of moving their data pipeline, their data architecture into a modern data architecture, and everyone's going to have different reasons for it. You know, what is your ROI on it? Why are you doing it? And what's the right timing and the right approach? This was the approach that worked for us. And I'll spend like a minute on each to tell you why we did it this way and what would I do differently since we're about halfway, 2/3 of the way through, if we could. So the first step, prior to us even thinking about this, we were running everything. Our entire stack was on-prem. We had a data center in the building next to the one that I worked in. It was a dedicated F5 on-prem data center. And we actually had a nice thing that was happening to our team. F5 was moving out of our old campus into our new F5 tower. And that created an opportunity for me to say, you know, the network people, the ops people came to me and said, hey, we're going to have to move all your servers. We're moving it to a colo data center. And I took a step back and I said, you know what? No, let's not do this. We don't have tons of opportunities to start a replatforming. Let's just move everything to Azure so that I don't have to worry about that colo data center. So our first step, we worked with Microsoft and we just lifted the whole platform. That was Tableau, Informatica, our SQL Server. We had an Oracle database, Oracle OBI. We just lift and shifted all of that over a weekend into Azure using site recovery. And the advantage there is now we really owned our own world in Azure. We weren't dependent on people spinning up VMs for us or getting us servers. We could control all of that ourselves. And it gave us the opportunity to start working in the cloud with different cloud tools. We started looking at Azure Data Warehouse, Synapse, managed instances of SQL Server, but it gave us all those tools to start looking at them. So we stood up an instance of Azure Data Warehouse initially, and that allowed us to start playing with tools like Fivetran and other replication tools to say, how do these work? We had our playground area where we controlled our own destiny. So if you have that opportunity, I highly recommend it because it gives you your own playground space without having to figure it into some big operations model. So the second step, we said, you know, we really need to figure out what we want to do with our cloud database. We were still running on-prem SQL Server. It was just hosted in Azure, which meant we still had all the same constraints. It was a 64-core primary database running on traditional Azure hardware. So we started our process of looking at what are the different cloud databases, what's the right one for us, and how would we move into that data warehouse. So we selected that. We ended up selecting Snowflake. We looked at a couple of different ones, and that was the best fit for F5. We knew that whatever we picked, we wanted it to work with our replicator tool. So that was one of our main issues. We wanted it to have a variable cost structure. We wanted to be able to do no downtime changes in sizing and whether it's on or off. We knew we wanted to be able to separate workloads. And so it was the best fit for us. Once we got that set up, and then we started moving into our data acquisition layer. So the key goal was replicate, don't ETL. So this is where I talk about turning things on its head. Instead of doing everything, you figure out what you want to extract, you extract it, you load it, you do all the transformations. And then at the very end of the pipe, you create views that end users can use. We just wanted to land everything. So we started that replication, started with Salesforce since we knew that one real well. And then moved into, I think we're replicating 7 data sources now that are in the cloud, plus a bunch of our SQL Server data and Oracle data also just replicating up into that. Our next step, modernize the consumption layer. So moving off of our legacy business intelligence tools to a cloud-based, subscription-based business intelligence tool. We're actually just getting that started, so we're still on this journey. We just started working with Tableau for Tableau Online. Again, one of the goals there was to reduce the friction of consumption. In our on-prem, people had to VPN in to use it. It was difficult to embed content inside tools like Teams and Salesforce, places where people are doing their day-to-day work. We want to make that easier. We want to make the mobile experience easier so people can just consume on the go. So moving to a cloud-based BI tool lets us have that experience and reduce the friction. And then our last step is modernizing the transformation and curation process. So we've started looking at different transformation tools. We don't have to worry about the E side of ETL anymore. We don't have to worry about the L side of ETL anymore. So we're really focusing on what do we need for transformation? The data's been landed. It just needs to be transformed, curated. So in the next couple of months, we'll be starting to look at what are the different tools that really focus on code-based transformation that can help us modernize in that area. And then the last area is really building up a strong data success, customer success program. That's key to all of this because you can do 1 through 5 and it doesn't bring code to customer. It doesn't improve time to insight if people aren't there ready to receive it. So you've got to have a strong data product and program manager. You've got to have that data success team that's working with the data scientists, working with the analysts, working with the people who are bringing their own data into the experimentation zone so that you start talking through what does it mean to have data success and customer success? How do you embed using data and analytics into everything people do? For me, one of my metrics on that is how often do I hear in meetings the phrase, where's your data that supports what you're telling me? Because to me, when I hear that, it's like, okay, people are thinking about data versus having gut level conversations. And when I hear other leaders asking that question, it tells me that this world of data is permeating at every level. One of the other things we're doing about data success, we are working with HR to make data part of everybody's job description. So whether, whatever a person does at the company, they will have a like MBO type goal about how they use data in their job and how they'll improve their decisions through the use of data. And that's, one of the ways we're trying to drive that data success program. So what's next? Yeah, modernize our transformation tool. We want to get off of Informatica Warescape. Those are still running in Azure. It creates some latency because we've got data going from the cloud into Azure, then back out of Azure to Snowflake, going through Fivetran, then being transformed, which means it's going from Snowflake back to Informatica, back to Snowflake. We're thinking about something like dbt. It's a tool we're looking at very closely. If you're thinking about moving to a pure transformation type tool, I highly recommend at least putting that on your short list. Modernizing consumption tools, like I said, moving off Tableau Server to Tableau Online. And then our last thing that we're doing, we debated at what point we wanted to do a data catalog because that's essential to making it so that people can consume your data better, especially as you move into a land everything model. But how do you make it easier to find the data, know what's out there, what's available, how to connect with the data, what are other people using? So the data catalog's like coming right away in our 2021 plan. So that is all I have. Sorry, I spoke way too fast for all that content. I see a lot of questions queued up, so let's kind of go through a couple of those.
Sweet. This is really great, Lance. I really liked your approach of making the data as accessible to the business as possible. I think that's really, really important. We did have a question come in. The first one that caught my eye was, how much time has ELT saved you and your team?
Yeah, so I can tell you that ELT has saved the team, and it's a crazy way of thinking about it, but infinite time, because there's often now questions that we don't ever have to answer. So people come into the data lake, they find what they want. My team never has to get involved, so it saves us all of the time. But when we do need to curate data, it is saving us really a factor of 50 times what we used to do, because we used to have to load and curate everything. And now we're just curating what we actually need to do. So the work that we do is proven out through a POC process where people use the raw data. They use the raw data. Maybe they even create a view in the experimental zone. We can then use that view and it's got all the business logic built into it. And then all we have to do is put that in our transformation tool.
Nice, nice. Next question is, how do you manage PII, personally identifiable information? We had a comment on the last one to ask, or people asked that we define the acronyms the first time we use them. So I'm trying to adhere to that. How do you replicate PII sensitive info in your raw data? And do you replicate that sensitive info in the raw data?
Great question. PII is on everyone's minds right now. GDPR, PII. So we do replicate everything. In Snowflake, we create views on top of the raw data. So anytime raw data is landed, we automatically create a view on that. And then we can use column level dynamic filtering on that view to mask out PII if we need to. So every time we bring a new data source in, we do a quick assessment with our privacy team, identify PII that might be in there, mask it out, and then using a role-based security model inside of Snowflake, people who are authorized to see that PII can see it inside of that column sensitive view. People who can't just don't see it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then one last question that has come in. What is the reason behind the desire to move away from Wearescape to DBT?
Oh, great question. So we loved Wearescape. We used Wearescape quite a bit when we were on a traditional model. One of the concerns with Wearescape, I can't get into too deeply, but we were challenged with our security posture. F5 is a security company. Security is like the most important thing we have. There was some concerns, and so we decided to move away from that. But the other part, we're trying to move to a continuous integration, continuous delivery model, and Wearescape just wasn't built for that on the ground up. I want to make it just like Java so that my data engineers can check out a pipeline, branch it, merge it, have it unit tested all automatically through ADO, Azure DevOps. And Wearescape really doesn't have a lot of that capability.
Got it. Actually, I lied. I have one more question. You spoke, what I really liked was your data customer success program. And I'm curious, how you've conducted these in the past and what tips you'd give the audience for ensuring success of these.
Yeah, so you have to have a multi-pronged approach, just like any customer success motion. So we worked very closely with our F5 product customer success team and said, hey, when people are buying F5 product, what do you do to make sure they're successful, whether they're on a perpetual model, a subscription model, an ELA model, because we want to use those best practices in our product. Because I come from the business. So from my perspective, data is just a product that I have to sell within F5. If people aren't buying my product, what's my job, right? So on my team, I have what I call my sales team, my marketing team, my customer success team, my engineering team. We run data like a product. And so for customer success, we have multiple channels. We look at the executive level. We look at the desk level. We do different things like analytics communities. We have what we call zoom out days where we do show and tells. We'll bring in some interesting data and let people play inside of Tableau and build things out with data sets like child names and things like that, that's just kind of fun to play with.
I love it. I love it. That's great. Well, thank you so much. This has been super informative. Just want to let everyone else know, we have about a 10-minute break right now. So take this opportunity to go and check out some of our sponsor pages. You can interact with them, download files, and earn points, those important gamification points that you're all trying to get. In a few minutes, in 15 minutes, we have the Scaling Data Culture talk that is going to be given by Gabby Steele and Leo Weiss of Data Culture. Super excited about that. And then so when you're ready, close out of this meeting, and then you'll go to the agenda tab and you'll click that in 15 minutes. Before we leave here, I just want to let you know that we have a sponsor video coming up. So be sure to check that out. It's Snowflake, and it's a really fantastic video.
Thanks.
Once upon a time, in a country known for its fine art and architecture, two boys were born, Benoit and Thierry.
You know, Thierry, I love data and I love computer science.
Me too.
Not only did Thierry and Benoit love big data, but they grew pretty fond of each other.
And I think you would call it a bromance.
Benoit was given the opportunity by an early investor to re-architect a data warehouse in the cloud entirely from scratch.
And I knew that there was no way I could build Snowflake on my own, so I needed Thierry, because together we have amazing idea and he's the most optimistic guy I know.
They decided to quit their jobs, buy a printer, whiteboard, and start working out of Benoit's apartment in San Mateo.
So basically, we propose a brand new architecture for the cloud. It is an architecture which is designed to support fault isolation, performance isolation, and elasticity of the cloud.
So what we wanted to do is to build a system that would adapt, the resources that was used based on the demand, such that for customers they would only pay for what they use, and also so that the system would scale to infinity.
Yeah, what he says.
So that's the story of how two people with a shared passion for data built a cloud data platform from scratch that changed the world.
Or at least change how we store and analyze enormous amounts of data.